It's lesson 9 today. So I'm going to go over assignment 2, which is a chance for you to exchange feedback on assignment 2. I did see most people submitted assignment 2 by last night, which is great. There were only a couple students who hadn't submitted. And then we're going to start diving into Angular. So that's also going to involve us learning a little bit and starting to play around with TypeScript, which is a flavor of JavaScript, similar but in some ways different from how we work with JavaScript in the past. And then we're going to use a tool, a command line tool called the Angular CLI. It works similar to the Express generator, where it will scaffold out a front-end application using Angular. And then we'll also kind of talk about the big picture. Today, we're just going to focus on Angular, but we're also going to kind of put it in context of a full mean stack application. So how does Angular fit with the other tools we've been using in this course, namely Node, Express, and MongoDB? So we've got the mean stack, Mongo, Express, Angular, Node. We've really worked with those other three. So today we were just going to deal with Angular. We'll use the CLI to build a simple app. And then over the next 2 weeks, we'll look at integrating an Angular front end with our Node, Express, MongoDB backend. I do want to look at Lab 2. It's due tonight, but I think due to kind of how late things were and the fact that not many people are here in class, I'll maybe give you until Monday night to do it. So I will just show you Lab 2. It's very simple. Make this available. So it should be visible in the assignments tab now. So I have partnered everybody in the class up into groups of 2. And I'll show you where to find your partner in a minute. You can find it on Blackboard if you're watching the video. Okay. So all you're going to do is connect with your partner, and you are going to exchange your assignment 2 submissions, your project plans. Okay. So for example, if you and Colton were partners, Matt, you would send your project plan assignment 2 doc to Colton. Colton, you would send yours to Matt. Just exchange them. And then I just want you to make some comments about your plan. So I have 3 questions I want you to answer. You can mark up and add on to their copy of the document. Number 1, what do you like about the project plan? Number 2, do you have any suggestions for how it could be improved? And any other comments or questions? And then the way I want you to submit Lab 2, and I will change the due date until I'm going to maybe make it due Monday night at midnight. Modify that due date. So I'll give you until Monday to do it. And then to submit, you have to do 2 things. Number 1, submit on Blackboard so that I see it, and then email your comment back to your partner. Okay, because if you just submit on Blackboard, then your partner doesn't have access to your comments. And you can also just copy me on the email. So I'll see that those comments were shared between partners. Okay, so I've updated the due date. It's not due until Monday night, but this will give you a chance as you're starting on assignment 2 to have a little bit of feedback from somebody else. And I will also later today mark the assignment 2 submissions and provide my own feedback. So how do you find your group? In Blackboard, you should have a groups link somewhere down near the bottom left. And you will see a group. You're going to be in a group called Lab 2 and either groups 1 to 6. So if you click into your group, you can see who your partner is. Okay, so you will want to connect with that partner so that you can exchange your assignment 2 documents. Okay, so these are easy marks. And it's a chance for you to incorporate feedback from one of your classmates in order to make sure your plan for your assignment 3 submission is even better. Okay. Are there any questions about that? I will update the due date here on Blackboard as well. So I will move it so that Lab 2 is not due until Monday, the 21st at midnight. Okay, so you have a few days to reach out to your partner. So I'll update that due date. So next week, we've got Lab 2 due on Monday, March 21st. Okay, so you can take the weekend to look at your partner's plan. I mean, these are easy marks. It's really going to take you 5-10 minutes. Are there any questions from anybody about the lab requirements or instructions? Are you guys able to see who your partners are? Okay. Okay, so you have until Monday night, and then you can incorporate some of that feedback as you are building out assignment 3. Okay, I've asked students to do this in the past. I've gotten good feedback that they really liked having a chance to get some feedback from a classmate before starting on the project. And then people were really curious at the end of the semester to be able to see each other's, especially their partners, where they provided some feedback at the beginning. I started doing this, incorporating this a couple years ago into this class, and students generally, they like that. Okay, so we're going to dive into Angular. Can be a little bit complicated to start, but it's pretty powerful. So here's what we're going to do first. By way of introduction, I've got 2 short videos here I want you to watch. These are from a LinkedIn Learning course, their Intro to Angular course. It is a few years old. So what I want you to do is click the link here, the Intro to Angular link. It'll open a new tab. You may, if you are not logged in to LinkedIn Learning, you can log in with your Georgian account. And I want you to just watch these first 2 videos, the why use Angular, which is 1.5 minutes, and then the what you should know. So this is just, a couple minutes worth of introductory videos. So have a look at those. Give me a thumbs up. I'll pause the recording. Give me a thumbs up when you've watched those, and then we'll kind of do a bit of a deeper dive. So I will. Okay, now this is actually an excellent course. It is a few years old, so there have been some changes, but this is actually a really good resource. We're going to go over a lot of the things that are covered in this course over our next 3 classes. Okay. So I'm going to give a little bit of an overview of my own. So what is Angular? How does this kind of fit? So Angular was developed as a dynamic front-end framework. We'll talk about the difference between a framework and a library in a minute. It was originally developed by Google, and really commonly we use it for what are known as SPAs, so single-page applications, where everything happens on one page and our data can be updated in real time, and we don't need to refresh or reload any pages. The data is always in a current state. It has both web and native mobile versions where we can use one code base and deploy an application to the browser, as well as compile for Android or iOS. And Angular is known as a framework. And what this means is it's what's called, we say it's opinionated. Angular has a very specific set of rules as to how our applications need to be structured. So it's very powerful. It will do a lot of things for us, much like the MVC framework with ASP.NET and .NET Core. But it's got very specific ways that it wants us to structure and build our applications. So this is different, a little bit different from other dynamic front-end JavaScript, what are called libraries, which would be something like Vue, which I think you guys learned last semester, or something like React, where those are considered libraries, where they have a bunch of prepackaged functionality, but as developers, we have a lot more flexibility about how we implement those things. Angular is a full framework because it's got these opinions. It tells us basically how to do things. Now, why do we care? I mean, we can already build a full application with Mongo, DB, Express, and Node, We just use our handlebars templating engine. So where does Angular kind of fit in here? So with Angular, what we're going to do is we are going to replace our handlebars, our HBS views, with the dynamic front end using Angular. Okay, and so it will replace handlebars. It is going to add quite a bit more code and complexity, but it means we can create a richer, more dynamic, faster user experience. So it's a lot more code and structure in the back end, but to produce a better UI. So where would we use Angular? Where would it fit? For example, I actually got an email yesterday from a student I taught a few years ago, and he's working on a project where the client, I won't say exactly what they sell, but it's a product with many components, and they want users to be able to configure it like in a browser or in a mobile app through a drag and drop method. So if I buy this component, I want to be able to visualize it. And if I get X, it means I have to add Y. So they want this dynamic front end where it will perform the logic telling them, well, if you get this component, you need this one. They can visually see the pieces coming together, and it will also show them the pricing in real time. So a front-end framework like Angular is perfect for developing that kind of powerful and rich dynamic front end. In terms of the language, something to be clear on is there is a difference between AngularJS and Angular. Okay? The original version, version 1, was known as AngularJS. So if you go and look at a video or tutorial and it says AngularJS, you don't want to use it, because as of version 2, it was renamed to simply Angular, and these versions are not compatible or interoperable. So you couldn't migrate an AngularJS version 1 to version 2. Now they're now on like version, I don't know what the latest stable is, 13 or 14. So anything from version 2 forward is interoperable, but 1 and 2, there was a clean break where you can't move between them. The homepage is angular.io. It may tell us here the current version. Does it tell us? They've got some useful stuff in tutorials here. Okay, we'll find out when we install it what version we're at. I'm not sure where we're at right now. I think somewhere around version 13. And these slides are on Blackboard. So here's how Angular works. So it has this, what it calls two-way data binding. So what this means is Angular is always checking whether the data and the UI are in sync. So if we change something in our views, it updates our data model. And if we change something in the data model, the view is automatically updated. So this means the data on our pages it's always showing in real time, and we don't have to refresh our browser. So it's component based, and we'll look a little bit more, I think you saw briefly in the video. So our Angular components, these are JavaScript files that basically control the logic of what happens in our view templates. And in the back end, we have these Angular service layers that kind of handle our back end logic and also eventually are going to connect to and talk to our Node back end. So we're going to be breaking up our application that we use Node Express MongoDB as a server-side app, and then a separate Angular application that handles the front end. So these Angular services are going to talk between our Angular front end and our Node Express back end. And I think in the video, you mentioned TypeScript. So what is TypeScript? So all the code we're going to be doing is in TypeScript. Has anybody worked with TypeScript before? Have you used it in any of your other classes? I suspect probably not. Anybody use TypeScript at all? So no? Okay, so what is TypeScript? It's a superset of JavaScript, and it was actually developed by Microsoft for one day. Okay. So the idea of TypeScript was to allow us to write strongly typed JavaScript, and it also lets us use object-oriented features like class inheritance. So the idea when we're creating our Angular applications, yeah, that's right, Felix, it can be used to identify data types. So JavaScript is loosely typed. right? So we can do things like this. If I go to a JavaScript kind of playhouse here for a minute, I'll just close up a couple things. So in JavaScript, I could do something like this, right? X C X, and then in JavaScript, I can do this. Right? In JavaScript, I could also do things like this. Right? JavaScript will let me do these kinds of things where I can change the data type of a variable, but also JavaScript, plain JavaScript, it kind of infers. So it decides here, okay, X must be a string. So I'm going to append, but now X must be a number. TypeScript will prevent this. We won't be able to do this in TypeScript. So instead of just using let, in TypeScript, we will declare, much like we would in C#, we would have to say that X is a string. And once we declare X as a string, we couldn't then reassign it a value that's as a number. So TypeScript is introducing this strong data typing. So what happens is our Angular code, we write it in TypeScript, and then it gets transpiled or converted into plain JavaScript. So when we create our Angular files, we're going to have these .ts extensions, but when we transpile it, our code editor is going to, our Visual Studio Code or WebStorm, it's automatically going to transpile our code. So when we make a .ts file, Angular will automatically make a matching .js file. And at runtime, it's the JS code that runs, but we code in TypeScript. And one of the other benefits is TypeScript will catch errors at coding and compile time. So we're going to have far fewer errors happening in the browser at runtime because TypeScript is going to check a lot of our logic syntax as we're coding. And it will prevent our applications from compiling if we have syntax errors, for example. So we will write our main logic in TypeScript. And there's a link. So again, these slides are on Blackboard. And there's a quick intro to TypeScript here. We can take a quick look at it. A sample of what TypeScript looks like. So, in JavaScript, if we use let hello world, like my example, it just infers this is a string, for instance. Whereas in TypeScript, we can create objects and they are strongly typed. So this actually, these classes in TypeScript actually look a lot like our Mongoose models, right? Our Mongoose schema, where we define a schema and we list the properties, but those properties all have data types. And we have to follow the data type rules. And here are the general types. We've got strings, numbers, Booleans, undefined, a function, or an array. Those would be the basic types in TypeScript. So there's just a bigger view of our two-way data binding. Okay, so let's, one other thing I will just jump back. I've also put the link up here. So here, this is the Angular official site. So all of the docs are here. They've got some tutorials, how to get started and things like that. So they're saying we should know HTML and JavaScript. Obviously, we're pretty familiar with those things. And TypeScript is new, but we're going to learn. And there's some good tutorials here you can walk through, developer guides, best practices. So we'll integrate some, but not all of this stuff over the next 3 weeks. They've got this tour of heroes, which is like a step-by-step. So if you're looking for another resource to practice with Angular, then this tutorial on the tour of heroes is pretty neat. Okay, so it shows you all the TypeScript code, how to add, and it will show you all the results. And this is like a 6-part tutorial series with all the code. So I've been through this before. It's quite good. So you can see they screenshot for you what your app should look like. So for today, we're just going to build a standalone Angular only application so we can get used to kind of working with TypeScript, looking at what the structure of the Angular CLI project looks like. And then next week, we're going to create a new one. And basically what we're going to do over the next 2 classes is rebuild our project tracker as a single page application, where Node and Express is just going to be a server backend API, but we're going to replace our handlebars views with an Angular front end that's all single page dynamic app. Okay, so I'm going to open up, for starters, I'll open up Visual Studio Code and just open up my project from last week. This doesn't really matter. We don't really need the last project for now, but probably easier. So open up your project and just open up your terminal. So we're going to install and use the Angular command line interface to create a new Angular application for us. So it's much like the Express generator, but again, it's a front end only application. There's no back end to it. So I'm inside my job tracker folder. Now I don't want to create the Angular app in here. I want to create it as a separate project. So I want to go back out of my job tracker. I want to go up one folder in my directory tree. So I'm just going to type cd ... So I'm now outside of the job tracker folder. I want to install the Angular CLI npm package, because this is a tool we'll use to build new Angular apps. So we're going to run npm I @angular /CLI. I'll just double check. I'm just going to double check, make sure that is the right package name, but it should be. I'll just get started. Yeah, so and we should install this globally so that we can use the Angular CLI anywhere on our machines to create new Angular apps. So I will add that -G. So npm I, doesn't matter whether the -G goes before it or not. npm I @angular /CLI -G. So this will install the Angular command line interface, and that'll allow us to run Angular commands in our terminal to do things like build a new application, compile it, or start it up on our local server. So install the Angular command line interface. I'll put it in the chat in case you need it. So now we're going to use this command line interface to create a new Angular application. So we type ng new, and I'll create a project just for today. Comp2106, lesson 9, winter 22. So we're not going to use this project after today. We'll make a new Angular app next week, and then we'll work on integrating it with our Node backend. So this is just a standalone project for today with no real backend. So I'm going to hit enter. And then the command line interface will present us with a few options. So the first thing is, do we want Angular routing? So routing is basically interpreting URLs so it can load different views. We don't really need it for today, but just I'll say yes, because typically we will use it. So I'll just type in a Y here and hit enter. And then it asks us to choose our style sheet format, and notice CSS is in blue. That's the default choice. So I'm just gonna say just plain CSS. So I'm just gonna hit the enter key at this prompt where it says, which style sheet format would you like to use? And that's really it. And now the command line interface is gonna run. It's gonna generate this project with a whole bunch of stuff inside of it. So once this is done running, okay, so you may need to reinstall Node first, Chris. So you should just be able to go to the Node homepage. Just go to Node.js, nodejs.org. You could just download this 16.14.2, the one that it says recommended for most users. It shouldn't take very long to download. And then you can try again. So if I go and look at the folder, we can have a quick look at what got created. So here's my folder, just created now, a minute ago. And it's big. The command line, right, look what it gives us. It's right now, it's 1/4 of a gigabyte. And the vast majority of this is in here. The node modules is almost 90+% of it. Now, when our application is ready to be deployed, we can compile it. It will bundle these so that our actual footprint of our Angular app will be tiny, like a few kilobytes, probably under 20 kilobytes. When we go to compile it, which we'll do in a few weeks, we won't need to worry about that for today. So now I want to go into our new directory. So I'll do cd Comp2106 lesson 9 2. Oops. Would help if I spelled it right. I'm going to change directories to go in here. And I'm also going to now open the project. I'm going to open the folder. So we can see exactly what's here. So we know that the node modules is 90% of the footprint. What else is in here? We've got a package.json. So we can see all the Angular dependencies that come with it. So we have things like a dependency for working with forms, animations, the core, which is the main Angular library, Angular routing for dispatching different URLs. It creates a simple README file, which tells us if we want to start the application, we can run the command ng-serve, and it will run our Angular app on localhost 4200. And it will automatically reload, so we don't need something like NodeMon that's built into the Angular CLI. It will do automatic hot reloads if we change any of the files. If we want to compile it for deployment, which we'll do, again, it'll shrink it down. We'll run this ng build. We'll do that later. It also has some features here for unit testing. Just hit enter, Chris, just the default CSS. If you hit enter, it will choose plain CSS. We've got there's a TypeScript configuration file. We don't really need to touch this. So it defaults to strict. So meaning, it will strictly enforce data typing on variables. and objects. There's an Angular configuration. Again, we don't really need to change things here. We'll leave this alone. So where's the actual code? In here under the source folder, we've got a few things here, some of which will look familiar. So we've got a favorite icon, which is a star. Here's our home page. So this is just HTML. There's a style sheet, which we'll modify later on. And then under assets, this is where we might put static assets like audio, video, image files. But most of the actual code lives here under this app folder. This is kind of the core. So there's a few files here that we'll need to pay attention to. One is this one called app.module.ts. This is kind of serves a similar purpose to our app.js file in our Express applications. This is kind of like the main configuration file that lists the dependencies. And in Angular language, in Angular TypeScript syntax, we use import rather than require. And our dependencies are enclosed in curly braces. We'll come back and work in this file a lot. Here's our first Angular component. So it imports the root of component from the Angular core library. It gives us this selector tag. We'll talk about this. And then it has a template URL. So what view is controlled by this component? And there's a link. It also comes with a style sheet. And there's a whole pile of code in here. We're going to try it out, and then we're going to kind of simplify this. There's a whole pile of HTML. So what we're going to do is we're going to run our application. So I'm going to go back to my terminal. And all I need to do here to run this is type ng serve. And if I type --o, it'll compile the app, start the local web server, and it will also open the website in a new tab in my browser. And the compilation will take a minute. This initial build. So here's the default page that we get. This is what this index.html looks like. So it's got about 300 lines of CSS right in the file, and then it takes our project name, it writes it out here, it also writes it into our title tag in our browser tab. And then there's some instructions about, what else we want to do. We'll do some of this stuff a little bit later. Okay, so here's our starting point. We get don't know how mobile responsive it is. Yep, we get a mobile responsive page. So right out of the box, we can just create an application with the CLI, and then without making any changes, much like the Express generator, we have a working app. Obviously, we don't want to show this stuff. We want to replace it with our own content. So let's look at how some of these changes work. So I'm going to open up, first of all, let's open under source and app, let's open this app.component.ts. Let's play around with this and make some changes here. So here we've got this title, the name of our project is here as a variable. In our class is exported, which we know from our node work that means it's public. And we actually see the title here. So let's go look at the HTML and see how and where this title is rendered. So it says our template URL is our app.component.html. I'm going to open that up. Here's our HTML file. So the first like 300 lines are style tags, starting from line 10. I'm just going to use Visual Studio Code to contract the style. And if I scroll down to line 344, the code here should look somewhat familiar. So what's happening here? If we look at our page. What does this code on line 344 that I've highlighted, what does it do? So in our code, it says bracket, bracket, title, and this is the result here that I've highlighted in white. Yeah, so it's calling the title variable from the component. So it's being set here on line 9 in our component. And then we're using this, the same handlebar syntax that we've used in our HBS templating. So if we change this variable in the component, our page should update here. I'm going to try that out. So go to my app component. Chris, I'm not sure why that would be. So yours actually says, well, I'm going to change it and see what happens. So I'm going to change this title to say lesson 9 app. So I'm changing it in my app.component.ts. And as soon as I click Control S, notice the browser refreshes and that variable updates. So it's doing a hot reload by default. So this isn't that different from setting a variable in our node controller. Okay, so Chris, you're missing a dependency. So what I would do is copy that line and use npm install to install that package. So I put it in the chat. So try installing that package, and then you may need to start your server again. Sorry, Chris, it should be npm I missed that. Okay, so we can set something in the component, and then we can use our handlebar syntax to render it at runtime on our page. Now, you'll notice something interesting about the way Angular puts these applications together. If I view the source of the page, notice here, we don't actually see any of the HTML source. All we see is this app root tag, right? So the source doesn't actually get sent to the browser. We know the HTML is here because we can see it, but we don't actually see the underlying code inside of that HTML file. So let's take a look at this app root tag and what it does. So in our component file, notice every Angular component, it has this selector property. So whenever we create a component, we define a custom HTML tag for it. So how does this all work? How is it that it shows up in our index file? I'll show you the chain of events here. So we've got our index.html over here. And notice on line 11, we have the app root tag. So this is calling our Angular component. So if we wanted to replace this with our own component, which we're going to do, we'd create a new component of our own with a different selector, and then we can replace our app root. So let's do a couple of other cleanup things on this first, and then we'll do that in the next part of our class. We're going to make a new component. First of all, I want to change this title. So it takes our project name, takes out the dashes, capitalizes the words. But this is a pretty lousy search engine title. So I'm going to change the title in my index.html to Lesson 9 Job Tracker. So this is just a plain old HTML change. Thought I saved it. I'll save it. And now I did have to do a refresh this time. The other thing I want to do is I want to take all of these styles that for some reason the command line interface is kind of goofy, right? If we look at our HTML, there's like 290 some odd lines of CSS. Okay, Chris, if you're getting that, I'm going to suggest trying to reinstall. I think something didn't go right with your Angular CLI. So I would run, putting it in the chat for you, Chris. Let's reinstall the Angular CLI. And once you do that, try and create a new project again. I think it didn't install complete. So then you can do ng new and some project name. So I want to move, I don't know why there's all this CSS in here. We have a global style sheet. So I want to move all the styles in here and then add a link to the global styles in our index page. And then all our components could share that CSS. So inside of I'm going to open up the app.component.html. If you can, just close up this style section that starts on line 10. We'll take you all the way to line 303. Let's just cut those. We'll remove it from our app component. I'm going to open up the styles.css and dump it in. And then I'll just delete the opening and closing style tags. So those will be the first and last lines of the file. We're in CSS, so we don't need style. I'll just take out. So if I go back now to the browser, all the CSS is going to be gone. At least it should be. We'll try this in a new browser. Oh, I don't think I saved my changes to save my change here now that I've removed all the CSS. Okay, so we have some, but now notice the font is gone. So in index.html, I'm going to add the style sheet link. And then we'll add our font, we'll apply our font to the body tag. So I'll add my link to the CSS. And then I'll go back to the CSS. There is a font in here, but we'll want to apply it. So after the :host, I also want to apply it to the body. So now my font comes back. So that style is now global because we've put it in our global style sheet. We've linked the global style sheet to into our index. Okay, it is 9:52, so I think what we will do, I'm going to stop the video here. I will create a new Git repository and upload what we've done so far. So if you're a bit behind, you can make those changes. And then let's take a 10-minute break here. I need to step away for a few minutes, and we will come back in 10 minutes. And then we'll look at making our own component and replacing all of this stuff with some dynamic data. Okay, we'll be back in 10.